on the show properly, we are chatting about lots of good stuff today. Gloucestershire farmers share their concerns on the price of fertiliser and also the impact that is having on their practice. Doobie Brothers and Long Train Running. It's just gone 12:30. Welcome along. You're listening to BBC Radio Gloucestershire. Now, the National Farmers Union is warning of potential shortage of fertiliser due to the war in Ukraine. Much of it is made in Russia or in Europe using Russian gas. Crops like wheat rely on nitrogen fertiliser, and farmers are facing a price hike if they can't get hold of it. Peter Kendall is a farmer and former president of the NFU. He's been explaining the challenges farmers currently face.
The problem is, to grow crops today, we need inorganic fertiliser. There hasn't been enough planning in the UK to move away from the agrochemicals, the inorganic fertilisers, to find newer, smarter ways of growing crops. And we are still very dependent on fertiliser, a lot of which is now sourced from Russia and Ukraine. To make inorganic fertiliser, it needs a phenomenal amount of energy. So firstly, if we're making and manufacturing fertiliser in the UK, the price has absolutely gone through the roof. That's the first thing. And secondly, fertiliser is also imported from Russia and Eastern Europe. So it's a double whammy. There's been a number of predictions of this impacting on food supply. Why? Because farmers will use less. That will impact on yields. And again, if you can't get hold of the product, that means crops will not deliver their full potential. So nothing like what the Ukrainian farmers are going through, but this is going to put pressure on the global food supply and lead to more food inflation.
Well, how might that be affecting farmers in Gloucestershire? Richard Cornock is a dairy farmer in Wootton-under-Edge, and James Cox is an arable farmer just outside of Tetbury, and they both join me on the line now. Hello. First of all, Richard, have you used fertiliser on your pasture fields yet?
No, I'm just about to, actually. I'll be looking to put out fertiliser on the fields in the next week or so, ready to get the grass going for the cows and obviously for our silage cut, which we'll be doing in May.
And how are your stocks? Are you worried?
Well, I'm very lucky in the fact that I bought our fertiliser in January, forward bought. We normally do that. The price has significantly increased even in January before the problem with Ukraine. My problem is going forward. I've got enough fertiliser really for first cut silage and stuff. But for what I call second cut, which is when we take another cut later in the season, I haven't got any fertiliser purchased for that. I think what I'm going to have to do is, luckily we had a really good growing season last year. I've got a fair amount of silage still available in the shed, which I'm going to try and keep over for next year. I'm going to reduce the amount of fertiliser I'm putting on in the next week and try and save a bit for later in the year. But ultimately, what that means is I will produce less grass than I normally do.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what is the alternative then? If you don't apply fertiliser, what happens?
Well, I mean, every farmer certainly who's got access to organic manure will put it on. But everyone knows that if you go for an organic system, it's brilliant, but it does not produce the yield that is out there with artificial fertilisers. So ultimately, I'm sure all the arable boys, as much as the dairy farmers, are now looking at thinking we're going to probably reduce our yield this year because the cost price of fertiliser, and if you can get it, is gone out through the roof, really.
Well, let's bring in then James, because James Cox, just outside of Tetbury, is an arable farmer. Hi, James.
Hi.
How is it affecting you?
I guess it's a fairly similar story to what you've heard from Peter and Richard, really. Again, we were lucky in as much as just by habit we've ordered early, so we've got fertiliser in for most of our requirement this year, but we won't be using the full rates that we might have done previously because it's not economic to do so. Even if you've got the fertiliser in stock, the replacement cost with the prices they're talking about at the moment mean that we'll be looking for optimum fertiliser sort of to get the as good a yield as we can without overspending, because obviously there's no point putting that last bit of fertiliser on if it's not giving you the reward.
So I've heard from some other farmers that I've been talking to this week, one of them in the Cotswolds, who says that he's not going to grow tilling wheat this year because you have to have more fertiliser to get a 13% protein. And so he's going to grow instead his wheat for animal feed. I mean, is this something that affects you? And what is it that you're growing this year?
Yeah, no, it's milling wheat, I think he was referring to, and it's exactly the same here. So all our wheat is a milling wheat variety, obviously grown for bread, and to actually get the specification they require for the flour does require extra nitrogen applied, and we can't justify it because the extra cost of that fertilizer compared to the premium just isn't justifiable, unfortunately. So it's going to be interesting to see how we can how millers will be able to adapt to cope with what milling wheat are available when it comes to this harvest.
It is interesting, isn't it? And it's interesting where the cost is going to go. Is the cost going to be put onto the consumer, do you think? Or do you think the farmers will have to absorb some of that cost as well, or a bit of everything?
Well, there's no guarantee that just because a fertilizer is expensive that somebody's going to pay me any more for my wheat. But obviously at the moment, prices are high for grains because of the expected reductions in yield, the fact that obviously Ukraine and Russia that export roughly 30% of the world's wheat aren't obviously exporting for the obvious reasons at this point in time. And the chances are that, production globally could be down going forward with the situation for fertilizers. So prices are higher at the moment. They will add a little bit to the food price, but I think, to be honest, the issue with energy fuel actually adds even more when it comes to the processing and delivering of these products. So it's a double whammy.
Yes, not just that, but also for your red diesel as well that you use on your machinery. Coming back then to Richard, we were chatting about this in the week, weren't we, about the red diesel? What price is it at now?
Well, I haven't actually phoned up for any this week, but I did get through. Well, last week I tried. One person wouldn't take any orders for at least a week. The other person said he'd phone me back, wouldn't, and didn't. I've heard rumours of £1.30 a litre, bearing in mind that we had delivery in about 3 weeks ago, and that was 80p a litre. So significant increase on that. And really, I'm sure it's the same with James. You can't reduce your red diesel usage, really, because you don't waste it anyway. But looking at the bigger picture on this, I think going forward, there's going to have to be a massive change in agricultural policy in this country, in the fact that we've kind of walked into a system where we rely on quite a lot of imports for food, and we need now to look at food security in this country. And I think there's going to have to be a change in how things are done. The loss of the single farm payment meant that the government were bringing policies such as rewilding and tree planting over a very productive farmland. And I think then they're going to have to rein back on that and look at the farmland that we've got and say this is a valuable resource that we need to secure for future farming. We can't just put trees on fields that are prime agricultural land. That's the wrong policy to have now, in my opinion. And that's something that I think will rapidly change in the next, year or so, I think.
James, have you got anything to add on that? I mean, the future of farming. I mean, it is obviously possible to grow, because we have organic flour, so it is possible to grow it without the fertilizer, or is it too hard?
Well, no, it's not a question of being hard. It's a question of the fact that it's not as productive as Richard mentioned earlier on. And if everybody was able to move to an organic system, and say the amount of food that we produce in this country would reduce, but there aren't even probably the resources available. So obviously, the organic manures, etc., to do that. But we do need to have a policy where we make the optimum use of all organic manures around, so we're less reliant on inorganic manures using, fossil fuels. So definitely a change in policy. We would really like to see the government prioritise food production in this country and not think that we can just import everything. I think the Secretary of State said that, we'll be little impacted by the lack of Ukraine wheat being produced this year. Well, it's a global system. We personally might not be, but globally, if the world is short of wheat, that has an impact for everyone eventually.
It's really good to hear your comments this afternoon. Thank you both, James Cox and Richard Cornock. It's just really good for us to understand the public, the sort of pressures that farmers are going through right now.